I'm delighted to say I'm joined now by the Work and Pension Secretary, Mel Stride. He's here to talk about the government's new work and health support service that aims to get people with tough health conditions back into work. We're going to come to that in a moment, if we can, Minister. I wanted to start with the Sky News story about a hack at the Ministry of Defence by the Chinese state, according to our reports. What is the government response to that?
Well, we will know that when Grant Shapps, the Defence Secretary, makes a statement to Parliament later on this afternoon. What I can tell you is that the MOD has acted very swiftly to take this database offline. It's a third-party database, incidentally, not one run directly by the MOD. And, of course, they are there to advise and provide support to those who may be concerned about the fact that this data has been breached. I
mean, is it a worrying sign that anything can be breached at the Ministry of Defence, no less?
Well, we're very... well, as I say, it wasn't an MOD database as such. It was a third party, but nonetheless, that's still a very significant matter, and Grant Shapps will be addressing that in Parliament this afternoon. But look, we take cyber security extremely seriously. Our intelligence services do. Our military does as well. We had the integrated defence review and a refresh of that recently, in which we put right at the heart of that exactly these kind of risks, particularly when it comes to state actors. So we are very alive to that. But I think we have to wait until we get the statement this afternoon to really hear more as to what the government's position is.
If the Chinese state is behind this, all bets off in terms of how we deal with China going forward?
Well, that is an assumption. We are not saying that at this precise moment. We'll have to wait to see what Grant Shapps has to say this afternoon. But look, we do recognise in that integrated review that I referred to that China is an epoch-defining challenge, as we class them. Our eyes are wide open when it comes to China, and that's why we've taken decisive action when it's come to Huawei, getting that out of our communication system, when it comes to nuclear technology, our energy infrastructure and so on, making sure that we get that balance right. And by balance, I mean protecting our security, at the same time recognising, of course, China is a very important economic player globally. And, of course, big global challenges like climate change need to have China at the table if we're to resolve those as well.
I'm interested, though, on how exactly you can step back, say, to a week ago, to how you would define China, because just last week, Antony Blinken said that they're helping Russia to perpetuate its aggression against Ukraine. They're helping to fuel the biggest threat to Europe's insecurity since the end of the Cold War. Just one of many factors that we could be pointing to. Do you see them as a challenger, an adversary, or would you go as far to say that China is an enemy?
I would define them, as the Security Review does, as an epoch-defining challenge. They are most definitely a challenge. And as I say, it is a question of getting that balance between making sure that we're sensible in terms of protecting ourselves. We've done a lot there in terms of our infrastructure, our communications, cyber and so on. But I think we'll have to wait really to hear what Grant Shapps has to say this afternoon as to whether there's anything new that the government is going to be saying here.
I wanted to move on to talk about what you wanted to come on about, the Work and Pension Secretary's part of the job. And your press release says that this Work Well initiative that you're talking about is groundbreaking. How is it groundbreaking?
Well, look, what we know, Wilf, is that there are a large volume of people in our country today who are becoming sick and going on a health journey and ending up in long-term sickness, disability benefits. There are 2.8 million people on those benefits, a long way from the labour market. What I want to do is to get in early and to bring together both healthcare support for those people, but critically also work support, work coach support, so that we can keep people in work rather than falling out of work, or if they're out of work, bring them into work as part of their recovery. And so often where, particularly you're looking at mental health conditions, work can be right at the centre of recovery. So what we're announcing today is that about a third of England is going to be covered by these pilots, so Greater Manchester, parts of Birmingham, London, Cambridgeshire, all the way down to Cornwall and the Isles of Scilly, to make sure that we stand up that local support, which GPs can refer into, people can self-refer into, but really breaking that cycle of sickness, unemployment, getting further away from the labour market.
So a lot of that sounds sensible, almost as if it should have been done already. So what is groundbreaking about what's happening today?
I think it's joining up. And some of this has been happening. So within the National Health Service, for example, there are talking therapies, they're called, which are there to help with mental health conditions. We've had employment advisors embedded and involved in that treatment for some time. We've also had employment advisors embedded in musculoskeletal treatment pathways as well. So very much the same idea. But I think what's groundbreaking is we're really bringing together in a very holistic way at an early stage the ability for people to step in and get that dual support, that co-support of the medical support plus the work-based support to make sure that we keep people in employment. We've got a great record of unemployment. Well, we've got 4 million more people in employment since 2010, near record low levels of unemployment. Pretty good story on economic inactivity overall, but when it comes to those long-term sick and disabilities, that's where our biggest challenge is, and this is right at the core of meeting that challenge.
Well, it's true that unemployment is relatively low. Employment, though, is not that high, and I guess that's what this is trying to address in terms of a poor record on labour participation.
No, historically, employment is very high. We've got more jobs in the economy today than at any time in our history.
But relative to the population, I mean, the population has grown as well. I mean, we could spend hours on this.
In percentage terms, it's high.
Labour participation is low, and it was a problem for a lot of G7 economies post the pandemic, but most of them have seen that steadily improve, and ours hasn't. But I guess that's part of what
think so. You're referring to economic inactivity. So overall, those people that are out of work and not looking for work, we have a lower level of economic inactivity than France, than Italy, than the United States, lower than the average for the OECD, G7 and the EU, and lower than every year under the last Labour government. But within that, where you are absolutely right, is we do have this issue with long-term sickness and disability that has been rising quite sharply, and that's why Workwell, bringing together health treatment and work support, is so important.
Our labour participation relative to our long-term average has stayed worse than it was pre-pandemic in a way that perhaps some other G7 economy has. But I totally accept the attempt to address that. Sorry, forgive me for moving it on, but just wanted to ask about the latest in the Israel-Gaza war as well, and in particular, the messages that we've seen from the Foreign Secretary, the Prime Minister, they've been pretty clear over the last month or so, expressing their deep concern about if a ground invasion on Rafah began. Do you see the events of the last 24, 36 hours as seeping into being now a ground invasion, and how will the government respond?
Well, we know that Israel, of course, has carried out a series of strikes on Rafah. And we know that they very recently had further strikes. This is why it is so important that we try and get and do all that we can with our partners in the region to get a deal between Israel and Hamas so that we can get a ceasefire. What that can lead to is, firstly, hostages being released, which is absolutely critical. But secondly, humanitarian aid, further humanitarian aid going into Gaza. Now, we've had some success working with allies and the Israelis in getting the Erez crossing open up in the north of Gaza, Ashdod as a port, functioning to get aid in, the work that we're doing in the Mediterranean to bring further aid in alongside the Americans. We know that the Karim Shalom crossing now down in the southeast has been announced that will remain open, and the Rafah crossing as well. But if we're to go still further in terms of getting more aid into Gaza, that we really do need to see this kind of deal happening. And I'm not going to comment on any of the specifics of that. It's at a delicate stage, but it is encouraging, at least, that Israel has sent a group to go and engage in negotiations at this stage. But it remains to be seen where that lands.
Mel Stride, we are out of time, sadly, but thank you so much for joining us this morning. Much appreciated.